Welcome back to the Dublin Citizens Assembly on the 25th of June, our morning session. So we're just finished the session with Secretary General Graham Doyle from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and we're now going to enter a Q&A for 15 minutes. So we're going to go to table 5 for the first question, please. Table 5. And Shifra.
Yes. Hi, I'm Shifra. I'm not freestyling the question. So, what is the protocol for decision-making in power balance between local and centralised government with regard to specific people involved? So that's kind of in relation to what you were saying about the functional area of Dublin being larger than the Dublin county. And how would that work with people in those areas being linked in and potentially being linked into the voting process? Thank you.
Just, Shifra, sorry, so I understand the question. Just the last thing you said threw me a little bit, the voting process.
Thank you. Rather than voting process, who is eligible to vote? So if people outside of Dublin County are going to be impacted by things like that.
Yeah, I suppose. Look, that's a real challenge when you know, a metropolitan area sort of bleeds out into surrounding areas, and you see that in London, for example. You see things at the edge of boroughs suddenly change quite significantly. And if you look at an area, if you go back to the 2012 Olympics, for example, in London, that whole area of Stratford, which is hugely redeveloped post-Olympics now, that was the sort of where four boroughs met, and that boundary met, and so you can see some of those impacts. So with you know, with a place like Dublin and the impacts and the way, I suppose, a lot of the people in surrounding counties now come to Dublin and earn their living in Dublin and need to get to Dublin, and that Dublin is a centre for services. I suppose that does give a challenge. Now, there are models. Áinle and I were talking about one earlier on of this. You know, I know Bertie was talking about this, the federalisation, and I know there was a question asked in terms of how that might work. I mean, there are models elsewhere where there's this idea of a kind of an associate membership from surrounding areas that give that perspective, I think. So that's one way that can sometimes be dealt with. But it is, you know, it's like when we try and look at a topic like transport in the context of a city or an urban environment, fine if it's all contained, but if it's done, if it's a system that goes beyond that, there's sometimes very different models. You see different cities in around the world, sometimes very much driven by a national transport model, and sometimes driven by a city model, or sometimes, again, in a city like London, it's actually more of a mixture. It's seen as a London model. So, for example, run by TfL, Transport for London. It's actually a mixture of both, in fact. But these are challenges, and it's a particular, I mean, I know your question highlights that it is a particular challenge for Dublin, but it is only in some of those mechanisms, I think, as I say, one of them is this idea of that associate membership of whatever the structure is in place. The other bit is good old-fashioned communication and engagement, and I would say around local government, through the CCMA, the City and County Managers Association, the Local Government Management Agency, the LGMA, there is a lot of cooperation now between different local authorities and a lot of engagement. So sometimes it's just that good old-fashioned communication. Okay.
Great, thanks for the question. So back to table 1 and James, please.
Morning, my name is James. Oh, sorry. My name is James, and the question for table 1 is, with the perceived resistance to devolution, how do you overcome such resistance within your own department in order to get buy-in, support and commitment to the perceived or to the proposed devolution? How do you deal with it, in other words?
How do you deal with resistance? Well, if resistance is there, and I know, look, there's always a danger with these things. Look, I'm not a career civil servant, so I mentioned that earlier. I sometimes get a little bit concerned when, and of course I would say this, but you know, in this case, the Custom House can be the bogeyman for everything. Oh, they don't want to do it, right? And I can't tell you how often I hear that, and I won't say it's never true, right? But it's very often untrue, is my experience of coming into the civil service. And I would also say that the way the civil service operates, and again, this is me coming as an outsider to it, is people are genuinely committed to public service. They genuinely want to do the right thing. The vast majority of people, yeah, okay, you can have a vested interest here and there. You can have a particular person with an agenda or whatever. That happens everywhere. But overall, I think people want to do the right thing, and they try to advise their minister of the day, whatever political persuasion they are from, of what they think the best thing to do is, right? And they'll argue tooth and nail for it, and they'll argue very strongly with their minister. But when a decision is made, they then switch immediately to how do we implement this. And I think in this case, James, I think this is government policy, so it is now into the how this gets done. And that's very genuine. That's not spin from me or anything. That's my genuine view of civil servants in the time that I've spent working with them. But, you know, it doesn't. There are issues and there are challenges, and you know we can talk about devolving all kinds of powers, and it can theoretically seem like a good idea, and then you come up against the practicalities of it. So it becomes a choice between the advantages and disadvantages of doing one thing over the other, debating all that out, trying to work your way through it, and seeing what model can work. And sometimes it's what can work now. Sometimes perfect can be the enemy of the good. So you say, okay, what can you do now, and what can you to make a difference? And then how do you move that forward to a 2B scenario, right? And how quickly can you do that? And if you can get those types of real discussions going on, that's the best policy gets made by doing that. And you overcome resistance, and you get, and sometimes it's not resistance because I don't want to do it. Sometimes it's resistance because people have genuine concerns about making, you know, Bertie talked earlier on about the potential for making something worse. So sometimes resistance is, oh, they just don't want to do it. That's a very, I'm sorry, I'm not accusing anybody in this room of it, but when people say that, sometimes it's a little bit lazy when they say, somebody just doesn't want to do something. Sometimes it is a question of working through the real policy issues and the real impact, and quite often those people have those genuine concerns and have to figure out through that dialogue how to overcome it. So I think it's that dialogue and working through and getting views. I mean, you know, this way of doing policy, I suppose, is an interesting one because, you know, we get people looking at something completely afresh and challenging us, and then we've got to work through that.
Thank you. Question, table 9, please, and question from Sean.
Hi, Graham. Table 9. Our question is in relation to how do you envisage your department working with the directly elected mayor to address the housing crisis in the city, and how that would relate to local government spend, as Dublin is quite a large portion of that, and is there any pre-positioning that you would do or need to do?
Well, thanks, Sean, for that. I suppose, look, there are so many aspects to housing and addressing the housing crisis. I would say it's very dangerous now if I get into this because we will literally be here all day, so I'm going to avoid that. I think there are so many aspects of policy, general policy, financial, economic policy, housing policy itself, planning policy. There are so many aspects that impact on the provision of housing, and we talked about even how education and the location of services and all of that impacts on housing. We have some of those levers in our department, but many of them actually reside elsewhere in government, which is why Housing for All as a policy, we've made it, and it was my personal mission along with the then Secretary to the Government to make it an all of government issue, because there was no point in saying, we let the people down in the custom house be beaten up over that. It's not our problem, right? Whereas actually, I mean, I'm very loath to give away the ending to Murder on the Orient Express, but actually, it's everything. It's everybody, right? It's not one thing. And I suppose what we're trying to do is work with the whole of government around that, whether it's the Department of Finance, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, our sister departments in a variety of ways. Those who bring labour into the market and all of that. So I suppose when it comes to dealing with any local authority, we, and Dublin being probably the Dublin local authorities being particularly key in this case, I mean, our door is continuously open for them. We engage with them all of the time. They are cooperating across the 4 Dublin authorities. The 4 chief executives and their teams are cooperating, as I understand it, and I'm not there that long, but as I understand it, in a much more cohesive way than they've ever done before. And just because of the magnitude and the importance of trying to address the housing piece. So our work is intensive with those local authorities. Our work would still be intensive under this. I am not so sure that it would change that much, Sean, is my answer, because the intensity of it, the focus on it, I'm not sure it could be that much greater. Yes, policies can change and you can go harder on something, and that's a different thing. But I think if we're specifically talking about the engagement with local authorities, those 4 chief executives, you know, we drive them hard and they drive us hard in terms of the policy piece, and they do speak, well, they're in different areas with different issues and all that. They do often quite speak with the same voice. So maybe I need to think about that a little bit longer, but definitely off the top of my head, I'm not sure this would change what we do in Dublin strictly from a housing perspective to that great degree.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Graham. We're into our last question. Thank you for all the questions, and we're going to pose those to Graham and to Áinle for answers that we can share with the Assembly. So we're going to finish up this session with a question from table 10, please, and Peter.
Yeah, sorry. My name is Ross Peters. Absent for a second. I'll just ask his question. Would you think that some sort of regional assembly for Dublin, sitting either alongside the current authorities or alongside the mayor, would be viable?
A regional assembly. Well, seeing as it's terrible to bring I was going to say a weapon to a fight, but this was never going to be that, and not use it. So I'm going to ask Áinle to maybe answer that question. Áinle has worked, I suppose, a lot in around the thinking around I suppose local government generally, and around the Limerick Mayor piece, and particularly that experience around the Limerick Mayor. But I suppose that interaction with regional assemblies and how that might work in the government, or in the Dublin case, and it's back to that kind of federalisation point, I think, to a degree as well.
Yes, I suppose it is. It's you're looking at this concept of a specific federal, what do you want to call it, authority for Dublin, maybe. How would that work? Bearing in mind that you have 180 councillors, I think, between the 4 local authorities, so there would be the structures that have to be put in place. But if you had something like that, somebody who could take sort of the overarching look at the entirety of Dublin and the bigger strategic questions, like getting from Malahide to Dunleary, things like a transport thing, just bringing it down to what exactly do the public want, what does the citizen need in the greater scheme of things. They need to have efficient transport. They need things like schools as well, that somebody could look and see where housing is being developed across all 4 local authorities. Where's the sensible place to put the school so that you get a sort of a collaborative work going on? And Graham also alluded there to, we talked about associate membership, and I think was the Shifra mentioned about the contiguous local authorities. For example, something like that, like transport, it really does impact on the 3 or 4 local authorities around the ring road. So the idea would be, if you had a federal system, you would have this regional, or this Dublin region, looking at the entire metropolitan area. The counties like Kildare, Wicklow, Meath would have a voice at that table in relation to the areas that impact on them. For example, like transport, because the majority of people living in Greystones or Navan or Naas or Kildare or Clonee, they all consider themselves Dublin, they're working in Dublin, and the impacts of that. So it's an interesting concept, and if it's one you want to explore as an alternative model, or as you might think your brief is not just the mayor for Dublin, but also local government structures. Perhaps that's something that you could think about. And the beauty of having this kind of assembly is that you're not blinkered the way us career civil servants are about what can be done. And what I would say to you is, it's not that something can't be done, but it hasn't been done yet. And maybe that would be something you could consider as well. So there you are, I'm throwing the question back at you. What do you think?
Áinle, thank you very much. So, as I mentioned before, we have a number of questions for Graham from Áinle, and we will take those away and ask for some responses that we can publish to yourselves and put on our website for the viewing public this morning. So, thanks again to the Secretary General of the Department of Housing and Local Government and Heritage, Graham Doyle, and to the senior official with local government expertise, Áinle Bhriain. Gurmíl Mágat, thank you.